ISHR, we are now back for our new next video lesson in this series, price ceilings, or sometimes called maximum price. This is when if a price is going up too much or getting out of control, governments may intervene with what's called a maximum price, and this is regulated by the government. Please note that if the price ceiling is going to be effective, it's going to have to be set below equilibrium. So it basically, think of a ceiling as something that stops you from going up. You can't go through the ceiling generally. Moving on. If the price ceiling is above equilibrium, it's not doing anything. It's completely ineffective. It doesn't do anything. Let's go ahead and give you some examples here. One example is rent controls, and you might know this from hearing people talk in Germany, but the price of an apartment, a Wohnung, in Germany is skyrocketing in many places. In Munich, in Hamburg, in Berlin, in parts of the Ruhrgebiet, the prices of these things are just absolutely absurd, of apartments. And so a government might step in and say, we're going to put a ceiling on how much you can increase the price of rent or a price on rent overall. They can also do it with things like food as well. If food is getting too expensive, they might put a price ceiling on certain foodstuffs so that stop it from getting too high. This is to help consumers be able to afford these basic necessities. All right. So what does it look like? What does the diagram look like? Well, you see we've got two diagrams here. And let's go ahead and take a look at the one on the left. We can see the price ceiling, or max price, is represented by a green line. Now maybe previously this was the old equilibrium price, PE and QE, but the government said that's too high. That's out of control. We got to lower it. So we're going to lower it to this where it says PC, or price ceiling. You could also label it PMax. And what will happen there is at that price, the quantity demanded is going to be higher. When the government says, guess what, it's a lower price, more people want to buy it. Conversely, firms will say, well, if you're going to force me to lower my price, I'm not going to make as much because I'm not making as much money. So what will end up happening is that QS will be a lot smaller than QD, and this is what's going to be produced. So this amount QS will be produced, and we will end up having a shortage. As more people want to buy it at the lower price, but there won't be enough being produced. If you can see here this dotted line, we can see the consumer surplus has now shrunk from this triangle to this, and producer surplus has also shrunk because they're only making this much. Actually, it's technically it's even lower. The producer surplus is actually just this little triangle here. And the consumer surplus is actually, it used to be this triangle, but now it's actually, we would say that it is this box here, right? And then this triangle. So all of this is the consumer surplus, what I'm showing you with the little highlighter here. This triangle here is what's called a dead weight loss. A dead weight loss. Looking over here, we're seeing a non-binding price ceiling. If the price ceiling is above equilibrium, well, the ceiling's not stopping the price from going up. Here, the price wants to go up. It naturally wants to go up to this amount, but it can't because the government's not letting it. So that's just important to note. One of the things to remember about price ceilings is that they will cause a shortage. So the whole idea is that we want to make things affordable for people. But what we've really done is generally we've reduced access. So as there isn't enough because of the ceiling, we've created a shortage. Two, some consumers will benefit, the ones that are able to buy the amount, but not all of them. Also, the businesses that make those goods and services often will be earning less money because the government's forcing their prices down. You will often see, kind of like in the picture here, long lines. People will, there just isn't enough, and people will be lining up to get those goods, and that's not really efficient. It's not a good use of society's resources for people to be standing in line all day long. Finally, and this always happens too, black markets or parallel markets, where people basically buy things at the low price, kind of like somebody might, looking here, would stand in this line and go buy something and then maybe try to sell it to people later in the line and say, hey, want to not wait in line? I'll sell it to you for a higher price. And that does happen with price ceilings, illegal markets. The government can get out of this two ways. They can subsidize it. By subsidizing it, you're going to increase the supply curve, and you're going to sort of hopefully eliminate the shortage problem, and we'll work on that in class. Also, you can give certain incentives for consumers to not buy. If we have a shortage, you could, and consumers were over purchasing something, you could try to incentivize them to not buy it. Okay, let's talk about the other thing, price floors, or what's known as a minimum price. It's basically a minimum price for a good or service, and it is also regulated by the government. A great example of this is minimum wage. Sometimes the government says we're going to have a minimum price for labor, and it will be set above what employers want to pay. They'll want to pay less, but the government says that's too low. You're going to have to pay more. Another example might be agricultural goods. If, for example, prices are dropping too much on agricultural goods, then the government might say, okay, we got to step in here. This is, farmers aren't earning any money. This is a real problem. We need to basically stop this. And so they will, they'll put in this price floor to let prices not get too low so that farmers can continue to make food and provide society with their basic needs. Often the government will buy the surplus in order to solve that problem. Let's take a look at what a price floor looks like. So we see here we've got a surplus here with this is an effective price floor. The minimum price is above equilibrium, meaning that naturally the price wants to be here, but the government is setting the minimum price higher than the actual price, and so the price wants to go down, but it can't. And so what ends up happening is this is our quantity demanded, and this is our quantity supplied. So when quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, we have a surplus, and that is kind of a problem because people aren't purchasing everything that the producers are making. Over here we have a ineffective price floor, and if the floor is below equilibrium, it's not stopping the price from going down. So this is doing nothing. So note that if it's a price floor, it has to be above equilibrium. It's really important to remember. Sometimes students get confused with this. The floor, the price floor or minimum price, is above equilibrium. The price ceiling is below equilibrium. So it's kind of a false friend, like the floor is above, the ceiling is below. I don't know if you can remember that, but just maybe say that in your head 10 times. The floor is above, the ceiling is below. All right, so one other thing about price floors. Like we said a moment ago, it will cause a surplus. As we saw in that last diagram, quantity supplied will be greater than quantity demanded. That's not necessarily a good allocation of resources, or some people could even say that that's inefficient. We've got too much being produced and people aren't buying it. The government will need to act and sort of help eliminate that surplus. Another thing that also happens is that because there is so much of a surplus, sometimes people will try to engage in illegal activities where they're because they can't sell it at the government price, they might try to find other people who are willing to pay a lower price and defeat the government's initiative. Finally, and this doesn't always happen, but it's important to note that generally most businesses do not look favorably upon increases in minimum wage or price floor for wages. They will say that it's going to lead to surplus labor, in other words, unemployment. Also, if you tell businesses you have to pay more for labor, well, that's going to shift supply to the left for a lot of goods and services, which might mean layoffs. And so generally, businesses look upon that very, very unfavorably. Finally, the governments can solve this by purchasing the surplus, and this will actually increase the demand curve, and we'll kind of show you this in class. Also, one thing to note too is that recently, kind of a good real-world example of this was Germany in 2015. A little bit over about, I guess technically it would be about almost 2 years ago, tried to put a minimum wage in place, and we did not see a real rise in overall unemployment in Germany because of the minimum wage. It did make things a little more expensive, but not too much. So that's just something kind of worth noting. All right, thanks for watching, and I hope this helped, and hopefully you've completed the learning goals from all the videos. Have a great day, and we will see you soon.